Hey there. Tonight I'll tell you a story that doesn't start with traffic horns or morning news. It starts with a cold wooden bench and the foggy breath of a father and son sheltering at a roadside bus stop. If you've ever thought that a homeless man must have given up on himself, then maybe you should stay until the very end of this story, because sometimes the ones who look like they've fallen are the very people quietly observing the system from its lowest level. But before we go any deeper, turn off your lights, let a soft breeze hum through your fan, and let yourself drift into one quiet night with two people the whole city had once forgotten. Don't forget to drop a comment. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, let's begin. The bus stop stood on the corner of Hartford and 9th, its streetlight flickering above a sign covered in faded graffiti from 3 rainy seasons ago. On the long bench sat a man maybe 38, with a patchy beard and a hoodie worn thin at the shoulders. He gently tapped the shoulder of a small figure, curled in a thin blanket. "Time to get up, Milo," he said softly. His voice was low but not sad. "You've got to catch the first bus." The boy rubbed his eyes, sitting up with a clear gaze that cut through the morning mist. He was about 8 years old, dark brown hair, hugging a torn backpack like it held treasure. "Dad, do you think we'll get a seat today?" Thomas the father smiled, not to answer, but just to gently brush the hair off his son's forehead. They started their day with a cup of cold tap water from the public faucet behind the terminal and a barley roll that the street cleaner had secretly left for them the day before. No hot drinks, no utensils. But the birds chirped overhead as if a few living things in this city still believed dawn was worth singing for. Thomas spread a paper napkin sun-dried the day before onto the bench for Milo to sit while they waited. The early breeze slipped down his collar. There was a faint smell of smoke from the Chinese restaurant down the block, blended with the damp scent of uncut grass. And there was something else, the scent of fatigue, but also the thinnest thread of hope. That man who looked like just another homeless stranger, no one knew he had once overseen an entire city's transit system. But now he sat there like the final passenger the city had forgotten. The irony. The bus that was about to arrive was the very one he had helped design 3 years ago. The door would open just as he had specified, but what he hadn't accounted for was that this time the door would close in his face, not because he was late, but because of a smell, and the little boy beside him with an old backpack, worn-out shoes, and a heart not yet twisted by prejudice was about to do something no one saw coming. Something small, very small, but it would shake the entire city. Bus number 41 arrived right on time like it did every day. 6:15 a.m. Its rear tire screeched faintly as it turned into the stop. The driver was a middle-aged man, black baseball cap pulled low, gripping a paper cup of coffee with the company's new logo, the very logo Thomas had approved 2 years ago. Thomas stood up, gently patted Milo's shoulder, adjusted the boy's backpack strap, and stepped onto the bus. But from the very first step, he felt it, the shift in the air. The woman in the front row turned her face away. A young man wearing headphones glanced at the pair, then sighed loud enough to be heard. A little girl tugged at her mother's hand and whispered, "Mom, they smell." Thomas lowered his head, not out of shame, but out of habit. He didn't blame them. He had stood on both sides before once, as the respected man in a tailored suit, and now as the one people leaned away from, just because he hadn't had access to soap. The driver paused his coffee, frowning. "Sir, I think you'll need to wait for the next one." Thomas looked up. "I just need to ride 3 stops. I've got fare." "Here." He tapped his payment card. Beep. Accepted. But the driver leaned forward, lowered his voice. "There have been complaints. The odor. It's uncomfortable. You understand, right?" Behind them, a man in business attire pushed forward. "If he gets on, I get off. I'm not going to work surrounded by that smell." A few voices chimed in a murmur of agreement, not out of hatred for Thomas, but because in this society, silence is safe and joining the crowd is easier than standing alone. Milo clutched his father's hand tightly. "But Dad, I don't smell bad." The driver sighed, then reached for the rear door button. "I don't want trouble. Please, sir, try the next bus, or another route." Thomas stepped back. No arguments, no pleading, just a nod. But in his eyes, behind the quiet acceptance, something shifted, something small, like a switch flipped. And once that switch was on, the old gears of a citywide system would begin to turn in a new direction. The bus door shut behind them with a clean, sharp hiss. For most passengers, it was the sound of a journey beginning. But for Thomas and Milo, it was the quiet end of something no one else could hear, as if the world had just said no, without needing any reason other than a feeling. Bus 41 rolled away from the stop, leaving behind two silhouettes in the morning sun, their shadows stretching over oil-slicked puddles on the pavement. Warm exhaust fumes mixed with the damp cloth smell of Thomas's jacket, filling the air with that strange blend of used-up fuel and weary dignity. He said nothing, just knelt to tie Milo's shoelaces, a habit he had never broken, not on nights they slept on benches, nor on mornings they shared half a sandwich for dinner. "Dad," Milo whispered, barely audible. "I don't know why that man didn't like us. I did take a shower." Thomas looked up. The morning light hit his face at an angle, revealing deep lines not carved by age, but by years of surviving something no one ever teaches you: systemic silence. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, firm but honest. He didn't say, "It's okay." He hated lying. A soft breeze carried a torn flyer along the sidewalk. Milo chased it, picking it up like it was treasure. He frowned. "Dad, how come buses have space for ads, but not for hand wipes?" Thomas laughed, a dry, quiet laugh, but real, because people still think buses are for the clean, punctual, able-bodied, not for the ones who actually need help. Milo didn't understand all of it, but he nodded like children do when learning to read adult emotions from tone, not words. The two of them began to walk again. No clear destination, because the bus that left had also taken away the path they needed. What they didn't know was that someone on that bus had looked back through the rearview mirror, their gaze lingering, and that a small ceiling-mounted camera had recorded everything footage that would be automatically uploaded into the internal feedback system. Thomas had once designed that exact system. What he hadn't foreseen was that one day he would be logged into it himself as a disturbance complaint. Or maybe he had been waiting for this moment all along. That afternoon, the sun took its time setting, as if feeling guilty for shining all day, without doing anything to help a father and son feel less out of place. Thomas and Milo returned to their usual spot, an old bus stop between Oak and Maple. The slanted roof sagged, the wooden bench was chipped and splintered, and at the far end, a rusted silver suggestion box sat forgotten, its lid stuck halfway open by layers of old tape. Thomas used a wet wipe to clean Milo's hands, then splashed his own face with water from a reused plastic bottle. They still had 2 small apples and a squash sandwich the corner bakery secretly handed them each evening. He tore the sandwich in half with care, like sharing a gift, not leftovers. "Dad," Milo said, after a long silence, watching people walk past the stop without a glance, "can I write something for them?" Thomas tilted his head. "For who?" "For the bus people. So, tomorrow, they won't kick you off again." Thomas paused. He'd once approved thousands of digital suggestion forms, personally revised the language for customer-facing interfaces. But now he simply nodded, because what this boy was about to do might be more powerful than any dashboard report. Milo rummaged through his backpack and pulled out a slightly wrinkled napkin, one of those disposable hand wipes, still clean enough to use. He took a marker and carefully wrote, "My dad didn't smell today. Only sunshine." The letters were uneven. Ink bled at the corners. But the message, short, honest, and gentle, was the kind of defense Thomas himself had never dared to say out loud. The boy folded the napkin into quarters, ran over to the old suggestion box, opened the creaky lid, and slipped it in. "All done," Milo said, brushing dust off his pants. "I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but if it does, they'll know you're a good person." Thomas said nothing. He pulled Milo into his arms, held him close. Inside, he felt something stirring, not quite emotion, not quite hope. Something deeper, something old, like the feeling he once had when looking at a clean traffic diagram, a solved bottleneck, a city flowing as it should. But this time, the blueprint didn't begin with a schematic. It started with a napkin, and that rusty, forgotten box, soon it would send a message no executive dashboard would dare to ignore. That night, after Milo had drifted into sleep, Thomas sat quietly in the corner of the bus stop, his back against a glass panel layered with faded posters and peeling tape. In his lap sat an old fabric backpack frayed at the edges, patched with care. And inside, wrapped in 2 worn jackets and moisture-proof lining, was a laptop he hadn't touched in nearly 3 years. The casing was chipped paint flaking. A small crack split the corner of the screen. He opened it gently, plugged in a power bank he'd safeguarded like a relic from the days when he still had a business card. The screen flickered, then lit up in that soft blue glow, the signature interface of the system he had once designed, Hawthorne Mobility OS. He typed in his password, still remembered it 23 characters, including his ex-wife's name and the year he earned his master's degree in transportation engineering. Login successful. The dashboard appeared still intact, citywide controls, route overlays, passenger reports, real-time feedback feeds. Nothing had changed, at least not on the surface. But he had. 3 years ago, after the accident that took his wife, his partner in work and life, Thomas had walked away, resigned, disconnected, disappeared. He left behind his title, his reputation, and a single note. If a system can't serve the most vulnerable, it doesn't deserve to operate. No one knew where he went. Rumors spread he'd gone rural, moved overseas. No one guessed he had been living beneath the very bus shelters he once approved. Now his finger hovered over the route map for line 41, the same bus that had denied him and his son that morning. He clicked into the passenger feedback folder, filtered by keywords, discrimination, hygiene, homeless. 1 in 17 reports in the last 60 days. He opened the footage from that morning, the internal camera on bus 41. He watched himself, unkempt, beard-old hoodie, holding Milo's hand. He listened again to the driver's voice. "I don't want trouble. Please, sir, take the next one." Thomas stared at the eyes on the screen, his own. Not angry, not ashamed, just resolute. A cold clarity he hadn't felt since the day she died. He moved to the next folder, scanned written feedback, and there it was, the napkin. "My dad didn't smell today, only sunshine." The handwritten message had been flagged by the AI as unclassified, low priority, ignored. Thomas right-clicked, mark as special report, re-evaluate. Then he opened the graphics module and began to draw again. Not just a new route, not just a new schedule, a new system. Because if a child's napkin could be dismissed that easily, then the entire foundation needed to be rewritten, from scratch. It was nearly 2 a.m. The city was asleep, but Thomas's old laptop still glowed bright with a single tab, open TransitNet Core, the backbone of the city's public transportation system. This was once his pride. He had believed that with enough coding with data-driven efficiency and public usage heat maps, he could create a transportation network that served everyone fairly. But tonight, he looked at it as a man might look at a grown child who had silently turned its back on him. He opened the bus route network overview. Bright blue lines glowed around affluent districts, financial zones, university clusters, airport loops, low-income neighborhoods, cold gray, barely lit. He clicked on the negative feedback map. Little red dots peppered the screen like a rash, each one a complaint. He zoomed in and let the system auto-generate tags. Smell was unbearable. They sat too close to my child, irresponsible. Next time, I'll take an Uber. Then he toggled open the internal action status. Most reports were marked non-critical inconvenience. Prioritize minimizing further complaints over route resolution. Thomas leaned back against the bench, his head tapping gently on the glass. It felt like he was reading an indictment line by line against himself. Every protocol, every priority flag, every line of logic he had once approved. All of it had built a system that ran smoothly as long as you looked like someone worth serving. And now that very system had rejected him, not because of a bug, but because of people. Milo stirred in his sleep nearby, letting out a soft, cold whimper. Thomas quietly tucked the boy's jacket higher over his chest and sat up straighter. He reopened the design module, set the old schematic to reference only, and began sketching a new blueprint. But this time, he ignored the classic logic of destination, volume, efficiency. Instead, he asked just one question: who gets left behind the most, and why? He marked every point in the city with high rejection rates, most clustered around shelters, mental health clinics, trade schools, and transitional housing centers. He added a layer titled, "Places where no one ever says sorry." Then he began to draw new routes, new stops, lower boarding steps, foldable seats for caregivers and strollers, emergency alert buttons not just for accidents but for discrimination. And right at the center of the map, he wrote, "Transit for Dignity." Not to get you there faster, but to make sure no one is left behind. Milo shifted again. Thomas closed his eyes for a brief moment. There was no rage in him, no tears, no pleas for fairness, only a quiet resolve. If the system can no longer recognize its own creator, then maybe it's time to create a new one, for those whom the city had looked past and then forgotten. Tuesday morning, 9:00 a.m., sharp. The routine internal meeting of Hawthorne Mobility began. Same virtual conference room, same gray backdrop, same 8 tiles on screen, 8 professionals in blazers and wireless earbuds, eyes split between the presentation slides and their phones. Thomas logged in with a concealed account. The credentials showed him as a special advisory proxy for a silent shareholder, a shadow title he had retained to track the company's finances. No one in the meeting knew he was there. The COO's voice echoed through the call. "We've seen a rise in feedback concerning driver conduct, especially on Route 41. There's a case spreading quietly on internal channels, a child's handwritten note saying, 'My dad doesn't smell, only sunshine.' Our system ignored it, but now it's surfacing." The PR director chuckled dryly. "We can't let a feel-good sob story hold the company hostage. Some writers felt offended by a smell. That's their problem, not ours." Someone else nodded. Suggestion: quietly remove handwritten notes from the feedback options. Less liability. Thomas sat still, watching faces he once called colleagues, some even friends. He'd dined with these people, defended them in shareholder meetings, and now they were debating how to erase a child's plea from the database. The CFO chimed in, "Or we could pivot, run a campaign, clean, green, safe transit. Focus on college students, young professionals, trendy families. Doesn't have to be dishonest, just curate the image." The group nodded in seamless agreement, like a machine oiled for consensus. Thomas muted his mic. He said nothing. Instead, he uploaded a file into the system's hidden chat. "Transit for Dignity, Master Design Draft V1. No introduction, no name, just the file. Inside, a full redesign, new routes, new signage, new rules of service, and one bolded line at the top, 'Serve no one, until you can serve the most vulnerable.'" While the meeting drifted into uniform color codes for driver uniforms and email drip campaigns for eco-conscious commuters, none of them noticed that the system backend had flagged the file as critical priority because it had been uploaded using the highest level admin key, still valid under the name Thomas Rayner. He closed his laptop. The morning wind stirred through the bus stop awning. He took a breath, stood up, and turned to Milo, who was finishing his apple. "Let's go check the mailbox, kid." The boy smiled, stuffing the napkin back into his coat pocket. Thomas didn't know, and didn't need to, that the entire city's gears had just begun to shift. Over the next 3 days, Thomas was no longer stationed at the same bench. He didn't linger under the same shelter anymore. Instead, he moved Milo in tow through neighborhoods, people often called the dead zones of the map, where transit moved. Slow bus shelters had no roofs. Elderly passengers stood to wait, and single mothers carried toddlers across traffic because crosswalks simply didn't exist. They sat in budget cafes near high schools, then moved to corner stores with plastic chairs and free Wi-Fi. Milo practiced his alphabet on the table, using cookie crumbs, while Thomas reopened his laptop, laying out one connection point after another on the glowing screen. No office, no slideshow presentations. All he needed was a power outlet and the patience to look straight into the system's old mistakes. He started with a single question. If I were to redraw the very first transit route I ever created, who would I serve first this time? This time, his priorities shifted. Not highest rider density, not peak hour traffic, but this station's near shelters must have roofs, soft benches, and hand-washing sinks. Bus lines near schools must run slower after 3 p.m., so no child gets left behind just for being slow. The front seat on every new bus must display a wooden plaque that reads, "This seat is for whoever needs it most today, no explanation required." He added an emergency button, not just for crashes, but for discrimination. It would connect directly to an independent response office, and he'd list his real name in the staff registry, but only reveal it after the system accepted the blueprint. On the second night, they sat in a 24/7 diner. A janitor approached their booth and paused. "Aren't you? Thomas Rayner people said you were gone." Thomas smiled, waving off the ghost of his past, like an old draft he no longer needed. "Gone. Maybe. Or maybe. I've been busy writing a new will." The janitor didn't get it, but Milo did and giggled into his paper cup of chocolate milk. On the third night, when the laptop screen finally displayed 14 newly coded routes, each one labeled simply from H1 to H14, short for homebound, Thomas placed his hand on the touchpad and saved the file with one line of text, "Transit for Dignity, Draft 0. He looked over at Milo now, asleep in his lap, still gripping the worn napkin, creased and faint, but still legible. And Thomas whispered to himself, "They might reject it. Maybe no one will approve a thing. But if someone out there, some stranger in some glass office opens this file, at least they'll know one thing. This system once turned away its own architect, and that's when it needed to be rewritten." Wednesday morning. They sat at a tiny neighborhood park in the heart of a weathered district where the trees leaned as if exhausted from holding up so many silent stories, and the benches smelled faintly of mildew and forgotten confessions. Thomas had just completed the final review of his design. He sat quietly, shoulders draped in a faded gray coat, eyes locked on his cracked laptop screen. Beside him, Milo was slowly chewing the last of his crushed biscuit legs, swinging over the bench, edge eyes tracing the path of an ant crawling along the iron armrest. Then, after a long pause, Milo looked up and asked Dad, "Why are you doing all this?" No anger in the boy's voice, no bitterness, just the plain curiosity of a child who had wandered through 3 long nights with a man reshaping a city. Thomas stopped typing. He closed his eyes briefly. "Do you remember how the driver kicked us off the bus the other day?" Milo nodded. "And remember the man with the cart full of bottles who got turned away too?" Another nod, slower this time. Thomas smiled gently. His voice dropped low. "I'm doing this because if I don't, one day you might grow up thinking, 'Your dad deserved that.'" The words landed softly like the final autumn leaf, kissing still water quiet but endless in their ripple. "I don't want you to ever believe that poor people deserve to be dirty, or that people get kicked out because they did something wrong, or that silence means someone has nothing to say." Thomas placed a hand on Milo's small back. "I want you to know that even when we had no home, we still had the right to redraw the map." Milo didn't say anything. He simply leaned his head on his father's shoulder, still clutching the now creased napkin, as if that paper scrap was their true compass, the one thing that had led them through shame, through rejection, and now towards something like hope. Thomas checked his watch. It was time. He opened his email. Typed into the subject line, "Transit for Dignity, Proposal for City Review." And in the body, "This map isn't for those in power. It's for those who've ever been told they didn't belong on the bus just because they didn't look the part." Then he clicked send. He didn't know who would open it. He didn't know what they'd do. But he knew this A system that once rejected its own architect would now have to answer to him. That evening, on the 17th floor of City Hall, the lights were still on. Not because anyone was working overtime, but because a chain of automated alerts had quietly lit up the inboxes of 3 departments simultaneously: transportation, urban planning, and internal communications. The first person to open it was the assistant to the deputy director of public transit. She glanced at the subject line, "Transit for Dignity, Proposal for City Review, no sender name." Just a masked email. Relay Safebox, Dart. 1. No corporate logo, no official header, no PR language. But attached was a 57 megabyte PDF file spanning 143 pages, including full schematics for 14 new bus routes labeled H1 through H14 behavioral analysis, from internal bus camera footage, faces blurred code proposals to revise passenger feedback algorithms, budget reallocation blueprints for underserved neighborhoods, and at the very end, a scanned image of a napkin with a child's handwriting. My dad didn't smell today, only sunshine. The file was automatically categorized as sensitive, priority level 5, due to the access key it was submitted with Thomas Rayner's, the founder of Hawthorne Mobility. All 3 departments began emailing one another, frantic and confused. Some thought it was a prank. Others whispered, Only Thomas wrote with notes like that. You can feel it. An emergency meeting was called. The media didn't know yet, but rumors were already starting to leak through internal chat threads. Did Rayner come back? I thought he disappeared. Whoever sent that proposal. It paused the executive meeting mid-slide. At that very moment, a query was issued to the Central Authentication Database, Verify Access Status T. Rayner, code 00137, Alpha. The system responded in 32 seconds. Access still, active status authorized, live session detected. The entire infrastructure core of Hawthorne Mobility froze in quiet shock. Meanwhile, 7 miles from downtown at a neglected bus stop under a crooked street lamp, Thomas shut his laptop. Milo curled beside him, slept soundly on the same wooden bench where they'd once been left behind. Thomas brushed the boy's hair gently and whispered, "Tomorrow. Maybe no one will say my name, but you'll see Kid the door will open." That night, no headlines broke. No speeches were made. But somewhere deep in the server logs of a city that had once forgotten him, a silent design file had begun making the entire system look at itself. Thursday, 7th, 32 a.m., floor 21, City Hall. A conference room with no windows, no cameras, no press. Only 8 people were present. Each of them someone you couldn't not invite when a single blueprint threatened to shake the foundations of an entire transit system. At the center of the room, a screen bearing the title, in bold, Transit for Dignity, System Level Proposal. The Director of Infrastructure leaned forward, both hands on the table. Is this even legal? An anonymous individual, even if it's Thomas Rayner, can't just override city planning protocols without council approval. The Head of Engineering. A quiet man who had once worked directly with Thomas adjusted his glasses carefully. We can't ignore the reality. This design surpasses anything we've ever drafted. And the terrifying part is it was built using our data. Data only someone with founder-level access could reach. A senior advisor rehired post-retirement due to his long institutional memory murmured from the corner, "You're missing the real question." What's more unsettling, that Thomas came back, or that he returned. As someone the system he built once rejected, no one answered. The deputy mayor, a younger woman known for her green transit for a younger future campaign, clicked through the proposal. Every stop, every route, each labeled with quiet, haunting annotations. This stop is often skipped by drivers near temporary shelters. This route needs softer seating, used heavily by dialysis patients. Do not install a forward-facing camera on front row, disables feel watched. She paused at the final page, a scan of the now famous napkin. My dad didn't smell today, only sunshine. Silence fell again. Then she looked up and said softly, "I don't care who sent this. If a napkin note can wake an entire transit system, maybe it was never fully awake to begin with." She turned to the technical team. "I want pilot testing on 3 lines, H3, H7, H14, prioritize rejection zones, and bring back the drivers who were once disciplined for helping unhoused people." The CFO began to raise his hand to object, but she cut him off with a glance. "Don't talk to me about cost. Yesterday, I sat next to an old woman with bloodied palms because the bus didn't stop in time. That's a cost you won't find in spreadsheets." And so without ceremony, without vote counting or applause, the room quietly shifted. For the first time in years, a policy discussion wasn't about branding the city, but about asking how many people were left behind and never even received an apology. Outside that meeting, the rumor swelled Thomas Rayner's back. But this time, he doesn't need a title. Saturday, the old bus stop where it had all begun. The sun rose slowly, mist hanging like a sheer scarf over the chipped shelter roof. 2 figures sat there just like always, but this time, Thomas didn't bow his head, and Milo didn't cling to his father's coat in quiet fear. The boy stood up proudly when the H7 bus rolled into view, a pilot route launched under the new Transit for Dignity plan. At first glance, the bus looked just like any other white and blue body, digital route display. But on the front windshield, a subtle line in small print read, "Pilot route, we stop for those who need." The door hissed open, not cold or mechanical, but like a front door being opened gently with time and warmth and intention. The driver was a middle-aged woman in a crisp uniform, eyes, calm posture, relaxed. She didn't ask any questions. She simply looked at Milo, then at Thomas, and gave a small nod. No frown, no side glance, no "try the next bus, sir." Just a soft invitation. "Come on in. First seat on the left's got extra padding. I patched it myself this morning." Milo hopped up first, then turned and tugged at his dad's hand. "See, Dad. It really is soft." Thomas followed him up. The floor felt flatter. The handrails had been lowered. Behind the driver's seat, a small map was taped to the wall. Route H7, community designed, built in collaboration with independent advocates. Thomas met the driver's gaze. She didn't ask who he was. Or maybe she already knew. Just before the doors closed, she leaned toward him and murmured, not to him, but into the space between them. Whoever drew this design must have once been left behind. Thomas nodded, said nothing. She smiled. "If you see him again, tell him I waited. Long enough." The doors closed. No murmurs from passengers, no turned heads, just the soft hum of tires rolling over morning pavement. And in Thomas's chest, something opened like a long rusted hinge, finally taking oil. They passed the first stop. Thomas sat still, gazing out the window. Milo sat beside him, drawing a bus with a smiling face on a napkin. No speeches, no applause. But for Thomas, it was the first time in 3 years he felt truly welcomed aboard. Not for his name, not for his resume, just for being human. 2 weeks after Route H7 began its pilot run, the name Thomas Rayner still hadn't appeared in any newspaper. No press conferences, no ribbon cuttings, no honorary badges pinned to his chest. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Thomas had declined every offer to return as CEO, CTO, or even as honorary advisor. He no longer wanted to sit atop a system from above. He only wanted to stand exactly where it once broke. So he proposed something no one expected. A new department unofficial called the Quiet Listening Unit. Its sole function: to receive input from the forgotten, the unhoused, single mothers, elderly passengers without smartphones, kids riding alone after school. To not prioritize complaints by urgency algorithms, to not auto-reply. And most importantly, any handwritten letter received must be read by a human being. Some leaders protested. They worried the unit would waste resources or become a magnet for baseless whining. Thomas simply said, "If we don't have time to hear from the vulnerable, then stop calling this a public system." The department was launched quietly in a small room tucked behind the city's central terminal. Thomas didn't sit in that office, but every morning he stopped by. He left a cup of tea, a handwritten thank you note, and walked out without needing recognition. His name wasn't on the door, but everyone there knew the man in the gray jacket with worn shoes and observant eyes was the one who'd made this place start listening. He no longer lived at the bus stop. A small 2-bedroom apartment had been offered to him through a city housing initiative after Milo, in a brief school newspaper interview, had accidentally said, "My dad redrew the roads the buses use now. I think he deserves a home." That line ended up printed on the morning paper, right next to a picture of the boy holding the old napkin with its ink-stained truth. "My dad didn't smell today, only sunshine." Thomas looked at the newspaper, then folded it up. He didn't keep it as a memento, but he did carefully slip that napkin into a new leather-bound notebook, one he now wrote in every week. At the top of each page, did anyone get left behind on today's route? It was a quiet Sunday morning. The newly renovated bus stop on Oak Street, the very place where father and son had once been told to get off, was finally complete. The new shelter had a frosted glass canopy, curved wooden benches like open arms, and behind them, a small wall for residents to leave behind what was once left unsaid. They called it the memory wall, not to mourn the dead, but to acknowledge what had survived, even through silence. City officials were present. Some wore suits, others dressed like the community, but no speeches were made. The deputy mayor simply said, "No ribbon cutting is meaningful if there are still people who've never been invited aboard." Then she turned to a small boy carrying a thin wooden frame in both arms, clumsy but determined, his hair messy, like he'd run all the way there. It was Milo. He stepped toward the white wall, holding a hammer and nail he'd brought himself, and mounted an old folded napkin, now sealed in clear plastic in a plain frame with no glitter, no gloss. The ink had faded, but the message still glowed. "My dad didn't smell today, only sunshine." No one applauded. No camera flash overwhelmed the moment. There was just the kind of silence, the kind that falls only when people know something has finally been made right. A woman with a cloth tote wept quietly in the back. She'd once been denied a ride for carrying a bag full of dirty clothes. An elderly man with a cane nodded slowly. He had once missed his stop because the driver shut the doors before his foot made it in. Thomas stood at the edge of the small crowd, hands in his coat pockets, offering no remarks. He let Milo walk alone, climb alone, pin the napkin himself, because that napkin now belonged to the city, and Milo had just taught it something no school ever could. When he finished, Milo turned and ran back to his father, grinning ear to ear. "It's up now, Dad. Now everyone will see the sunshine." Thomas bent down to hug him. He said nothing, but in his eyes there was sunlight. 1 month later, the city began to change, not in flashy slogans or billboard campaigns, but through quiet details. The front seats of buses now carried small wooden plaques that read, "If you need this seat today, please don't hesitate. No one is judged here." Drivers once reprimanded for excessive leniency were quietly rehired. They smiled more, asked passengers how their day was, and sometimes they waited longer, not because of delays, but because someone needed 5 extra seconds to climb aboard on tired legs. At every major stop, a small box appeared, holding handwritten letters from passengers, not addressed to the transit board, not expecting replies, just meant to say, "I used to be left behind." But today I made it, and Thomas. He didn't sit on any board, didn't speak at any public event. He simply took the same seat every Monday morning on one of the new pilot routes at peak hour when the world rushed around him. He wore his same old coat, pulled his hat low, listened to quiet jazz through worn headphones, and watched, not to inspect, not to judge, just to ensure no one got left behind. As for Milo, he'd started writing in a little notebook he titled "People I Met on the Bus." Each page held a story: the sleepy gatekeeper, the girl with a backpack bigger than herself, the driver who liked grape jelly on toast. He wrote in crooked, hopeful letters, the same hand that had once scrawled a napkin note that shook an entire city. And on the first page of that notebook, he kept it unchanged. My dad didn't smell today, only sunshine. No one could count how many had read that sentence. But people started noticing the sunlight through bus windows in the morning, that soft, golden light that once meant nothing. Now felt like an answer to a question too many were afraid to ask. Will the system ever see me as human? And maybe the answer wasn't in a policy, but in something simpler, the way the bus door now slowed down for just one person still running to catch up, just one person. And somehow that was enough. You've just listened to a true social justice story, where small acts quietly reshape entire systems. If you've ever felt left behind, not just at a bus stop, but anywhere, tell us in the comments, what did you wish someone had done for you? And if this story found a soft place in your heart, leave a like, share it forward, and let someone know we don't need to be perfect to be kind, just present and right on time. Good night if you're listening in the dark, and a gentle day ahead if it's morning. Social justice. Telling stories that seem small, but were never meaningless.